Welcome! This is going to be a discussion of Terrifier 3. As Eli Roth says, a movie that should be watched like any other good horror movie through your fingers. Now, what we'll cover through this video, first of all, I liked it. Did I like it? Yes, I liked it. Were there things that made my skin crawl? Yes. Were there things that made me go, oh my God, I can't believe I'm seeing this? Yes, but I liked it. A couple of things about the criticisms that I just want to chat about, because I will talk about the things I liked about the movie. Certainly, did it push the envelope? Yes. There were scenes in the movie that were right out of, dare I say it, any cartel flailing video that is available on the dark web that you can see. One scene in particular right out of that. And you know, personal taste, preference as to whether it's too far. Definitely grotesque. But we've been here, done that before. That's what I want to go into as part of this review. And also, I'd like to talk about something, because as you know, I'm a psychologist. Cognitive dissonance, big part of social psychology. Leon Festinger, part of social psychology's holy trinity. There are a few terms in psychology that have escaped and made it into the broader cultural ethos, cognitive dissonance being one of them. And dare I say, it is largely misunderstood, it is overused, and it is misused. So I know you did not come here to get Dave's psychology class lecture on what cognitive dissonance is. That's another video, another part of the channel. But you are going to hear about my dissonance experience with this movie, and as part of that, what dissonance actually is. Because it is not, I think, what you think it is. So with that, let's jump into, we done been here before, baby, the history of schlock and awe in films. Yeah, brief history. Okay, so everything that you've heard about this movie, Terrifier 3, well, before I get into that, let me just say, one of the things that I think about a lot when I started doing this channel and when I started doing these videos, my other topics, the rants and the Doc Dave's Got Feelings, is what's my voice? What is something that's unique that I bring to the table, that I can offer? And one of the things, because I really think there are two things that are unique, independent of placing everything within a broader social psychological context, which I think is very important and very relevant, particularly today. But the one thing is institutional memory. I am 59 years old. I remember things in a way that other content reviewers do not. I am twice as old as Coy Jandro. Coy is wonderful. He has an amazing review, and he's an amazing content creator and an amazing reviewer. But there's something about being 36 years old and something about being 59 years old, and there's something that I think I can bring and offer to the table simply because I am 59 years old that is unique and different to what Coy brings to the table. Doesn't make me better, doesn't make him better, doesn't make one worse, doesn't make one better. It's just I bring a certain level of seasoning, shall we say, and institutional memory to the table. Because I've lived it. I've been there. And we're going to get to this when we get to these movies. And the other thing that I think I bring is a rather unique way of tying things together and making connections between things that I don't see a lot of other content creators making connections between. So, what's unique? What's the unique voice and we're going to see this played out in looking at Terrifier 3, institutional memory, placing things in a broader historical context, and making connections. So, this is not the first movie that people have walked out of. This is not the first movie that have made people faint. This is not the first movie that have made people throw up. And guess what? It won't be the last. This is just a smattering of movies over the last, dare I say, 90 years that have made people literally throw up, faint, and walk out. And the list is much longer than this, particularly when you look at the fact that not only are films over 100 years, but over the course of the entire planet. These are ones that are generally familiar with a U.S. audience, an American audience. But Terrifier has a rather unique place in this, and I want to get into that toward the end of this segment, and so we'll do it. A couple of movies I want to highlight. King Kong. Not many people look at King Kong today as a movie that made people faint, pass out, and walk out. But yes, it did. There was a scene that was actually deleted from King Kong for a good 40, 50 years. King Kong's on the island before he gets captured, kidnapped by the evil white people, which they tend to do with the brown folks. You know what I mean? And back then, the brown folks were called natives. And King Kong, this is independent of him stomping on them. There are literal scenes of King Kong stomping on natives, foot lifts up, and you see the squished native under King Kong's foot, and it just slowly, and this is all, Ray Harryhausen stop motion. The native plops off. Horrifying scene in the 1930s. That's one thing. The scene in particular that made people throw up. King Kong picks up a flailing native, bites him in half, spits out the top half, throws down the bottom half. That made people insane, drove people mad. The Exorcist. I was just watching a documentary. It's one of my favorite movies ever. Definitely in my top 5 movies of all time. But it made people throw up, pass out, and walk out. I do believe is my parents, if memory serves, my parents went to this movie on a date night, and they came home early. My sister and I were having I think tons of fun with our babysitter at the time, and they came home early. They walked out. They left the movie. I don't recall them, at least for a long time, at least a decade after that movie, going on a date night to a movie again. In psychology, we call that one trial avoidance. Such a horrific experience that you never engage in that behavior again. You don't put The Exorcist in the same category as Terrifier 3, but it at the time elicited the same behavior. And you can go watch this documentary on YouTube. You look at people being interviewed coming out of the premiere of The Exorcist, and other than them wearing 1970s clothes, what they say about The Exorcist, and you just take the audio clips, and what people are saying about Terrifier verbatim, it's the same damn thing. There are movies like Goodnight Mommy, a relatively recent movie, I think 2009. Another movie, Antichrist. There are definitely European movies on the list. Funnily enough, Oscar-nominated film, 127 Hours, made people physically ill, made people pass out. You know the scene I'm talking about, but it's not in the category as a Pennywise movie, as a Jigsaw movie, as a Chucky movie. Hostel. And the reason I bring up Hostel is because just recently I was watching an interview with Eli Roth. It was at Silver Screen Con 2024. And he was talking about his movies, and he actually has a line. One of the most notorious movies in this genre category is Cannibal Holocaust, and it just about everybody I know, at least, even Eli Roth agrees that Cannibal Holocaust goes too far because it actually does have scenes where real live animals are killed on film. And that's a line too far. And even he says, no, bad, do not do that, horrible, bad, 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 bad. He has a lot of very interesting things to say about the nature of horror and what a horror film is, what a horror film should do, and what it means to have a lasting film in horror. The most interesting thing saying, you only get one chance to scare somebody with a horror movie. What brings somebody back to a horror movie for a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time? Because by the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth time, you're bored with the kills, you're bored with the blood, you're bored with the guts. What are you coming back for? You're coming back for the story. You're coming back for the lore. You're coming back for the characters. You're coming back for the craft. You're coming back for how did they do it? How did they set it up? What do you think is going to come next? It was a very interesting talk. I highly recommend it. Again, Silver Screen Con 2024. It's on YouTube. Eli Roth. Here's the connection between Hostel and Terrifier that I thought was very, very interesting. Hostel had a very tough time. He was talking about Hostel and how nobody wanted to release it. Nobody wanted to distribute it because it was deemed as too violent, and studios thought nobody would want to see it, and movie distributors at that time were beholden to studios. So if a studio didn't want to release a movie, and in order to release a movie, you had to have a rating attached to it, then movie theaters were not going to show that movie. And they certainly weren't going to show that movie if it didn't have a rating attached. So if a studio said, we're not going to distribute the movie, you're screwed as a distributor. And this was the battle that Eli Roth had with getting Hostel out after it was made. It was deemed too violent. It was deemed too gory. And in the context of Terrifier, whether it is or isn't, whether it's comparable, not comparable, the fascinating difference between the two is that Terrifier was released without a rating, and the theater said, no problem, I'll show it. Maybe or maybe not that had something to do with the tanking of Joker 2. That certainly didn't hurt things. But the idea of a gory, violent, independent horror movie being released without a rating, being distributed nationwide, and movie theaters saying, yeah, we'll show it, no problem. We don't need a fucking rating to do it. That is new. That's a new business model, and that is something that we have not seen before in this space. And that is a huge part of the success of Terrifier 3. Now, with that as a backdrop, Terrifier 3, in my humble opinion, is a darn good movie. It sets up some very interesting things. It's got some great world building. It's got some fascinating lore. And guess what? It does something that puts it over the top for me. I told you Exorcist was like one of my top films of all time. I went to Catholic school. I even went to a Jesuit Catholic school, just like the ones in Exorcist. Nothing makes me happier than watching a religious-themed horror movie, and that's what they set up for where they go for the next segment of the Terrifier franchise. And the religious iconography at the end of Terrifier 3, oh my sweet Jesus. So, with that, on to the actual movie. Hey, so here we are. We're back. Terrifier 3. And here are just some quick thoughts about what I'm going to cover in my kind of like review slash thoughts of the film, which I really did like. So one of the things that I'd like to talk about, just because people do talk about it a little bit, and I think they don't take the full context into account, is this idea of dissonance. Today, by the way, my fidget toy, a nice little piece of leather, because I need the fidget toy to relax my brain. So dissonance, what it is, again, this is not one of my social psych classes, but in the context of the broader discussion about Terrifier 3, I do think this idea of dissonance, of what it is, gives us an opportunity to talk about the appropriateness and the completeness of dissonance, because people aren't talking about it in terms of what the actual phenomenon as presented by Leon Festinger, hallowed be thy name, what he actually meant and what he discussed and what his work presents. So that's one of the things we'll talk about. The second thing that I want to talk about is what truly makes art terrifying, what makes him the Terrifier. Very appropriate use of the word, by the way, great word usage, as I like to say to my kids from time to time. Art is one of the most perfect manifestations of id I've seen on film in a long time. And again, quasi-psych, we do bring it back to psych, because that's what I am. I'm a psychologist, social psychologist. We bring it back. What does that mean? Id, Freudian term, very loaded, but it does give us an opportunity, again, to make a distinction between how, when these terms from my academic discipline kind of escape the textbooks and get out into the real world, they tend to take on a life of their own. And id and Freudian terms, that's another example of a body of work that has, again, taken on a life of its own and is largely misunderstood, if not directly misrepresented. So we'll talk about that and what I mean by art is id. And then in terms of the narrative structure of the movie, which is where I come back to in terms of why I like the film so much. 5 long years. 5 years between Terrifier 2, Terrifier 3. There's actually a very funny reason that Damien Leone gave for why that is the case. He said quite explicitly his preference, it would have been picking up pretty much right where Terrifier 2 left off, but for a variety of different reasons, not the least of which is trying financially to get the money together to get these movies made. Not an easy feat by any stretch of the imagination. It took 5 years to get to this point. And then finally, building out of that, what I think is a really neat plot twist, in not necessarily twist, but direction the plot went, is what I'll refer to with two of the main characters, the brother-sister duo, Sienna and Jonathan. Oh yes, spoilers. Hopefully that's not too much of a spoiler. Is this sis versus bro, and it's not like they're going against each other. It's like they are approaching art as a concept, as a realistic being, as a force to be reckoned with. They are approaching art from two very different perspectives and approaches, and they are hurtling and barreling toward one another, or toward art more succinctly. And where that takes them is part of where the horror in this horror movie comes from. So, as we start, dissonance. What is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance, as originally proposed by Leon Festinger way back in the 1950s. By the way, if you get a chance to read his book, When Prophecy Fails, I believe 54, and I think the article, Festinger and Carl Smith, was 57. But When Prophecy Fails, and I'll talk about this in another video where I'm going to talk about 3 social psychologists who revolutionized my field. This hugely important book. But anyway, I digress. It is a motivational state. Yes, it is an anxiety state, but it is a motivational state. So, I'm watching Terrifier. I don't consider myself to be a gore hound. I don't actively seek out gore. I don't particularly like gore. I'm not on the dark web watching, slaughter kills from cartels, or watching animal dismemberment videos going with glee. I'm not a particular, I like being scared. I've always loved being scared. I particularly loved psychological horror. I think Exorcist 3 is one of the best psychological horror movies of all time. I came out of that movie and I looked at my wife at the time and I said, best mind fuck I've had in a long, long time. And it is. And that's what made that movie particularly terrifying. How it went burrowed deep into your brain and fucked around with you in that way. Not necessarily with the visual gore side of things. So I don't consider myself to be a gore hound. I get no pleasure of seeing gore. I don't like consuming gore. But there's something about Art the Clown, and he is very compelling as a character. I enjoyed the first 2 movies. And I liked that they were building. There was something about the world that kept expanding and building and getting larger. So I went into Terrifier 3 expecting a little bit more of the same, and boy, did this movie over-deliver, and I really enjoyed it. It's one of the most fun times I've had at a movie this year. And most of the movie, I can't believe they're doing this. No! Certainly cringy, certainly stomach churning, like most other audiences, I believe, and certainly with the part of the country I live in. Yes, I live in a college town, but it's a college town where the community around us, let's just say it's a relatively rural, conservative community, which is I would assume is relatively antithetical to a kind of gory slasher type movie audience, at least from when I was growing up in downtown Toronto, which is where I would see those movies as a kid. But anyway, again, I digress. People getting physically ill, people running out of the theater to go to the bathroom, yes, all of that happened. But then the social psychologist in my brain goes, wait a minute, why are you enjoying this movie so much? And I can't answer that question or explore the answer to that question without thinking of the term dissonance. So what is dissonance? What is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance is when you as an individual, remember this is individual behavior, that's what Festinger is talking about. You can use the term dissonance to refer to somebody else. But that's not what the term refers to. That's not what the term actually means. And this is a theme that's going to come up in other videos, that people use these terms broadly outside of contexts in which they were originally used. And that pisses me the hell off. But anyway, cognitive dissonance is about yourself. You engage in a behavior that is contradictory to something about yourself that you hold dear, that you seem to be, that's part of yourself, that you see as part of yourself. I'm not a violent person. I do not like to engage in gore. So what happens when I engage in behaviors that contradict that belief that I have? Because remember, social psychology truism. Belief, thought, which is belief, feeling, and behavior. 3 dimensions of human behavior, of the human condition, shall we say. We like to assume that they usually align with one another. But in reality, not so much. So we have this thought part of ourselves that says, don't like gore. Then we have this behavior we're engaging in, watching an extraordinarily violent movie. And for the 3rd dimension, affect, we've got, enjoyment. I'm really liking this. And Mr. or Ms. Homunculus, way back in that reptilian part of our brain, they're going, hey, Dave, something's not making sense. Something is not lining up. Dissonance is a sense of anxiety. Dissonance is something that is profoundly upsetting because it is an inherent contradiction. It makes you uncomfortable, and it should make you uncomfortable because you are engaging in a behavior that does not objectively make sense to you, and it creates an anxiety so powerful that you have to engage in another behavior to reduce that anxiety. It's this second process, dissonance reduction, that nobody talks about. And for me, this second process, which is a motivational process, we are motivated to reduce dissonance, to reduce anxiety. And this is the key thing about what social psych says about human behavior and judgment, that we are driven by a homeostatic mechanism to maintain balance. It's hard, or at least I find it hard, to argue with that approach to looking at human judgment and behavior. So homeostasis, we are out of alignment. We have to maintain balance. What's one way, and there are a number of ways in which you can do that. What's one way in which you can maintain balance? Reduce dissonance. One way, that movie sucked. Bang. Dissonance reduced, you're out of the door. Another way, I cannot believe, it's inappropriate. The gore is inappropriate. We've got to get the movie off the screen. We've got to get it out of the mind. What are we doing to the children? We're destroying the children. Bang, dissonance reduced, it's gone. Finding ways to denigrate the makers of the movie. Oh, these evil people. What's the agenda that they're pushing? Next thing you know, they're going to be running sex rings out of pizzerias in Virginia. There's a nice little reference for you. We got the election coming up in a week and a half. Make sure you vote for the right person, and it's not the person who's on the right. Thank you. I've done my due diligence. So, and that's a valid dissonance reduction. The whole point being, you engage in another behavior that's designed to reduce the anxiety. An equally valid one, which I had to explore for myself, was, well, you know what? I'm looking at all of these. all of these other things. It's got good lore. It's got good characters. I like the way it was shot. I thought it was really well paced. All of these things come here to, it's a really well made movie. That's why I liked it. And if it's a really well made movie, and if I can hang my hat on that, if I can come up with enough reasons why it's a really well made movie, dissonance reduced, there you go. My world is now in balance, cognitively at least. I can now go on. So, dissonance. The important thing in here is dissonance is not just the anxiety that is aroused by engaging in a behavior that's contradictory to a belief or a strongly held belief. It also is coupled, it's hand in hand. You can't have dissonance without dissonance reduction. It is coupled with this idea of you now have to reduce that anxiety. You now have to engage in, because it's a motivational process, the homeostatically driven process. You now have to reduce that anxiety. And there are, because behavior is all multiply determined, you now have to reduce that anxiety. And there are a number of equally valid ways. And for some people, they reduce the anxiety by attacking the movie. It's a valid way of doing it. It's not my way of doing it. For others, they look at the actual movie itself, how it was created, how it was made. That's my approach. I actually happen to think it is a really well-made movie, independent of whether there was gore or no gore. Because I'm going to be coming back to this movie for a number of years to come, simply because of what the movie sets up. And with that in mind, let's move on from dissonance and go into the id. So, art is id. What do I mean by that? What is truly terrifying about the Terrifier, Art the Clown, is his unpredictability. And what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that there is no impulse control in art. And in essence, that's all that the id is. The id is the two basic drives that Freud argued drive all human behavior. A desire to create and a desire to destroy. A life instinct and a death instinct. Native American culture, same thing. You have two wolves battling for control at any given point in time. The one who wins is the one who you feed the most. With art, I think you know which one wins. And there is no thought. There is no control. There is no conscience. There is no morality. Whatever pops into his head, he does. And it doesn't matter what. That's why, euphemistically speaking, Art likes to play with his food. Admittedly, it's not food. This is not a cannibal holocaust scenario type of thing. But Art does, and I think that's part of what people find really upsetting and overly gratuitous with the Terrifier movies. Art plays and really enjoys playing with his victims in a way that we don't see with other slashers. In other slasher movies, you see the kill and it's done. Chucky stabs, it's done. Jason stabs, it's done. Mike Myers stabs, done. That's it, right? Art lingers. Art takes enjoyment out of lingering, toying, playing with his victims. in a way that is very disturbing. And that is it. Whatever he thinks, he does. There is no filter. Absolutely no filter. And that, the unpredictability of that, the fact that you do not know, you cannot know, there is no way of knowing what he will do from one second to the next, either in the context of the movie as a character or as an audience member. That's what makes it terrifying. Because remember, like in a Scream movie, right? You're watching a Scream movie, and part of the enjoyment of watching a Scream movie is yelling at the screen, going, "Sidney, don't open the door," because you know Ghostface is going to jump out and just stab, because you know that's what Ghostface is doing. Ghostface is waiting for Sidney because Ghostface wants to get her. Get her. Sorry. There's some order, structure, predictability. But that doesn't exist in the Terrifier universe. Not at all. You cannot go, "Sienna, don't, blah, blah, blah." Because in the Terrifier universe, there is no such thing as an order and structure and predictability. The only thing you know is that art will kill. You don't know how, you don't know when, you don't know with what, you just know that it will happen. And it's that heightens the terror, hence the word Terrifier. Again, Damien, great word usage. So, let me just check my notes. One of the things that I think is really cool about this is social psychology, my field, has studied aggression for decades. Decades. It is one of the most interesting things I think my field studies, and I always used to have a kind of beefed up segment on serial killers. I actually had a course on serial killers and aggression that I used to teach. And in terms of, and there are a number of different types of serial killers. I'm really into profiling, been looking at this and studying this for like 30 years now. And there is a particular type of serial killer. And in terms of depictions of serial killers, not the biographical stuff, but fictional depictions of serial killers, creating serial killers on film, art's about as close to the real thing as you can get. And that is also, I think, one of the things that, for me, makes it particularly terrifying. His unpredictability, his viciousness, definitely put him in a pantheon of really, really strong villainous characters. So, and as we're about to see as we move on, bringing in the religious component, which has always kind of been there since the beginning and since the shorts. Remember that before the first Terrifier movie, there were 2 Terrifier short films, and in the very first Terrifier short film, he was working for the devil. He delivered a victim to the devil. So this idea of Art the Clown being in service of demons is not new to either Terrifier 2 or Terrifier 3. It's always been a part of the lore. It was always there in Damien's original idea. And that's what's kind of neat, that there has been a story that's been there since 2016, 2015, 2016. It's been largely fleshed out, and it's just now getting all the pieces put together behind it and getting fleshed out. But the story's already there. It's not like Jason, where after 10 Jason movies, they just slop them together. It's not like there's continuity. It's not like there's lore. It's just, I mean, what the hell was Jason 10 when Jason was in space? What the fuck? I mean, it's, there. Just look at that. Look at Jason and look at Terrifier. And tell me they're in the same freaking, like, universe. They're not. Not like universe, but you know what I mean. You got movie where it's just kill, 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 show little booby kill. And then you've got Terrifier, which they actually have a plan. They actually have thought things out. It's been there for years before, and it's clear they got a plan about where they're going. And now they're just putting everything together because they actually have the money to do it. More props to you. To actually have a story and see it told over time, that's great. As opposed to just throwing shit against the wall and hoping something will stick, no pun intended. So, art is it. Now, one of the things that I was most impressed with in looking back at this movie is, and it reminded me of what I thought was one of the neat things about Terminator 2. Excuse me. Terminator 2. Judgment Day. And that, what in hearing James Cameron talk about Judgment Day, one of the first things he says was, well, let's assume that, you know, what would Sarah Connor's life have been like living with this information for all of those years? Okay. And then that was the starting point. Seems like that's a very similar thing to what Damien did here. What would Sienna and Jonathan's lives have been like living with what happened to them with art and the knowledge of art for 5 years? Because it's been 5 years. Which brings us back to that point I mentioned earlier. So, originally the plan was for Terrifier 3 to pretty much pick up right after the events of Terrifier 2. So, in a recent interview, Damien was asked why the 5 year, and very, very funny. Basically, you have puberty to blame. Not anybody's puberty, but the puberty of the actor who plays the young Jonathan. That he had grown so much between when they finished shooting Terrifier 2 and began shooting Terrifier 3 that credibly they could, because in real time it was like 5 years, credibly they could not argue that it was just a matter of weeks between the end of one story and the beginning of the third. So that's why it was set 5 years later. But he took that seriously. What would it have been like for the characters of Sienna and Jonathan? What would their lives have been like? What would they have gone through? And kind of bridging this with Sis versus Bro, two very different approaches to dealing with the knowledge of art and who art is and what art represents. The world thinks that art is dead, and rightly so. Dude was decapitated at the end of the last movie, for God's sake. But, you know, Demon, he comes back in a really interesting way. But in the back of Sienna's head, she knew art was going to come back. She never truly believed that he was dead. She had a lot of her own demons to deal with. She was in an institution. She gets released. But she's trying to deal emotionally, and she's wrecked, psychologically wrecked, clearly is dealing with her own demons. She's not in a good place at the beginning of this movie. Jonathan is the proverbial ostrich. Jonathan has been burying Art the clown, trying to live his good life. College, I guess, maybe end of high school, beginning of college, but it's a private, you know, I was going to say sleepaway camp, but it's not. It's a boarding school. And remember, Mom died in the second movie, and Dad is gone and dead. So they're on their own. They were separated. One's in an institution, one's in a boarding school. And they've had very little, as you can infer, very little contact with one another over the last 5 years. Partly because I think they have very different approaches for dealing with art, and very different feelings about art and the wreckage he has brought upon their lives. But also, very strained relationships with one another. And that's the start of the movie. What brings them together is the Christmas holidays. Brilliant idea to bring them together over the holidays. And it's over the course of this movie that you see them start about as far apart as you can, physically, emotionally, from one another, and then slowly come together. Come together as in he's coming home for the holidays, she's released for the holidays, they come to their uncle and aunt's house. It's a holiday about family, get together, let's enjoy, let's have fun. The aunt and uncle are a little reticent. There's a niece who idolizes Gabby, little Gabby. A niece who idolizes Sienna. And there's a very interesting dynamic that happens as Sienna, Gabby, and Jonathan, their dynamics grow and change throughout the course of the film. Obviously, Art continues to wreak havoc, and he challenges Sienna, he challenges Jonathan. Jonathan plays the role of the skeptic. Sienna is definitely a true believer, but she doesn't want to be a believer. She doesn't want to adopt the mantle of being the one who is responsible for vanquishing Art. She doesn't believe she's worthy of being the one who's responsible for vanquishing Art. So it's not just sis versus bro. It's skeptic versus believer. It's avoider versus reluctant adopter of a mantle. All of these things, brilliantly, I think, humbly, woven into the script and played out over the course of the film, which has these two central characters, which, yes, it's an art movie, Terrifier 3, the third one of Art the Clown. But the core structure of the film, where the horror comes from, are these two characters who, through Art's machinations, Sienna and Jonathan, are barreling, hurtling, and they can't stop it, toward not just one another, but toward Art. And when they collide, it's going to be horrific, it's going to be violent, and it's going to be bloody. And about a third, if not halfway through the movie, we begin to realize that Gabby's going to get caught in the middle of that too. Now, I'm not going to give too many spoilers, but there are a couple things that I do want to note. A couple of cameos that I thought were really nice. Tom Savini, Damien Leone has been very open about how Tom Savini has been a mentor, but definitely inspiration for him. Great to see a cameo by Tom Savini in the movie. Chris Jericho was in the second movie. Chris Jericho is in this movie. Chris Jericho, he was a great wrestler about 15, 20 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago. He's been in the business over 30 years. I think right now he is in the category of professional wrestlers, which is retire now because you're already a joke and you don't want to become worse than you already are. Independent of being a professional wrestler, he also has a rock star persona. He has his own band, and he's a singer. He sucks as a singer. His band sucks, but it is nice to know that there's something he's worse at than singing, and it's acting. And it's awfully nice to see that the manner of his kill is to have his jaw and tongue ripped out of his head. So that was satisfying. He hopes that his acting career will explode out of this appearance. One can only hope that doesn't happen. But anyway, I digress. A couple other things that were noteworthy for me in terms of other connections to things that I thought were really nice. In the third act of the film, particularly toward the end, I saw a lot of similarity between the dynamic between Sienna and Gabby as Ripley and Newt. Particularly at the end, when Gabby gets sucked down to hell, and Sienna vows to get her back. We don't see her get her back because something's got to get paid off in Terrifier 4. But that is for me at least clearly a callback to Ripley and Newt. Just a wonderful dynamic. Also, Jonathan's dynamic, funnily enough, with Sienna reminds me of Tanjiro's dynamic with his sister Nezuko. So by the end of the movie, just about every living relative that we know of for Jonathan and Sienna's family has been wiped off the face of the earth. Who knows? In Terrifier 4, they may find more. But as far as we know, and even with little cousin Gabby, she's now sucked down into hell. Jonathan didn't want to be there. Jonathan thought this was a stupid idea. Jonathan was resisting going to his uncle's house for Christmas, being with his sister. He knew it was a bad idea. But when his sister called for help, she was family. And he put aside that fear. He put aside every fiber of his being saying, this is probably going to be your last ride, dude, if you do it. And he went. And I just thought that was a beautiful act. And we see his fear through this entire last third. That he went there, he buried his instincts, he buried his fear, and he went there out of his love for his sister to help his sister, knowing that in all likelihood he was going to die. And we are certainly led to believe that is the case. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not so sure. But that certainly struck me as a Tanjiro-Nezuko dynamic, for those of you who love Demon Slayer as much as me. Everything in that first season of Demon Slayer, Tanjiro does because you are my sister, you are the only piece of my family left alive, and I will go through hell to make sure that you do not die. And it's all driven out of his love for his sister, which I think is just not only extraordinarily beautiful, but it's something you don't usually see portrayed that much. You get the I'll die for you, my love. I'll die for you, my girlfriend. I'll set you. I mean, what the hell's the plot of Die Hard? He's going through all that shit for his ex. But for a sister? No, you don't see that. So the idea of that type of sacrifice for a sister, I think that's a kind of really, really, really cool thing. And then the very last thing I'd like to talk about is the arc of Sienna, and Sienna finally accepting and in essence being anointed. I mean, talk about the religious iconography in the last part of this film. She, and in some ways you could say it is not particularly subtle, but when she accepts her mantle as being the chosen, for lack of a better word, anti-art, the chosen antithesis of art, the only person who can vanquish the demon that has chosen art as its vessel to create and kill and destroy. The way that that is depicted is by putting a crown of thorns on her head while her wrists are opened up and bleed onto the floor while she is tied into a wooden chair. If that is not blatant religious iconography, I don't know what the fuck is. And she survives that and lives and vanquishes not art, because unlike Terrifier 2, art lives and escapes at the end of this movie. Art's accomplice, she dies. But the religious iconography at the end of this, the full-on adoption of we are angel, devil, that I thought was brilliant. And the world building was chef's kiss, was wonderful. I thought this was extraordinarily deep. It was extraordinarily emotionally moving. This is more than just me coming up with off-the-cuff things to reduce my anxiety. This is well thought out, well structured. This is not somebody putting shit together because the studio gave me a deadline and I got to start shooting in 2 months. It's clear that the team making this movie has been thinking about this for years, has been planning this for years, and I am very excited about where this story goes. Partly because it's clear the story has an end. Again, this is not Jason. This is not somebody who's going to be resurrected to do 10, 11, 12, 13. And we'll find another group of horny teenagers who just, you know, it's not a fuck, marry, kill. It's a Jason fuck, marry, kill. Or fuck, kill. Who knows? But it's not that. There is a definitive end. And is it going to come at the end of 4? Probably not. My bet is that if it doesn't end in 4, it might end in 4. But if it doesn't end in 4, it'll definitely end in 5. But there is a deep, deep, deep religious undertone to this movie that is going to broadly play into good versus evil that we have only barely scratched the surface of. And I can't wait to see that. So with that, 2 huge thumbs up. I really, really liked Terrifier 3. Can't wait to see more. Good job. See you on the next side, my friends.